A good contract is worth its weight in gold. Are you a creative entrepreneur who contracts your services to others? Well, listen up, because this is for you. The Smithers Law Group has created 14 master contracts specifically for creative entrepreneurs. These contracts are industry specific, they're fully customizable, and you only pay a one-time fee. This is so much better and more affordable than speaking with an attorney who's going to charge you an hourly consultation fee, and it's so much more secure than just Googling up your contract and hoping for the best. Find your fully customizable and industry-specific contract at stulawgroup.com. Search for the contract link. And don't forget to tell them that I sent you.
Two weeks in, I had to make a decision to be courageous and say, I'm struggling to understand why you thought it was okay to forward this email. Again, awareness. And she writes back to me saying that she's thankful that I brought it to her attention because it would be something that she's not aware of. And I'm like, so I write back, well, colored hasn't been used since the 1960s. You know that part, right?
Welcome to Impostrix Podcast, the space where we talk about the complexities of imposter syndrome narratives as experienced by people of color, and where we talk about navigating the landscape of racial toxicity in our careers. I'm Whitney Knox-Lee. I'm a consultant, an attorney, a mediator, and I'm your host. I'm here on this journey with you toward validation, rootedness, and liberation. Join me and our guests as we share relatable experiences, explore impactful tips and tools, and talk about the complexities of the pursuit of career success as people of color. Here we're becoming rooted in our power together. We're setting aside imposter syndrome, interrupting racial toxicity and racism, and redefining what it means to thrive in our careers. Here, we're being validated. So let's go. Welcome back to Impostrix Podcast. This is Whitney, and I am here with Talib, and I am looking forward to this conversation. I spoke with Talib a couple of weeks ago, interviewing on his podcast, the Afros and Audios Black History Month interview series. I'll let him talk about that. We had such a great time, and I was just like, okay, well, now I need to have you on my podcast. So he is here with us today. Talib, can you introduce yourself and share with us what identities you're bringing to this conversation?
Sure. So I am Talib Jasir, and I am the founder and CEO of Afros and Audio Podcast Festival, the first two-day conference for and by Black indie podcast creators and audio professionals, which started in 2019. And I'm also a podcast producer, a writer, a life coach, a visionary, all of those things, a parent, a partner, a friend, all of those things.
Yes, thank you. And what is your racial identity?
I identify as a Black American.
I identify as a Black American too. So what does that mean to you? Black American.
Sure. It means for me, one, I think race is a construct. So I think Black is an identifier, right? If I say that, you know what I mean. If you say it, I know what you mean. But also that there's a really, really strong culture that we have created and developed here. I am of the belief that we came before Columbus. So I believe that we are indigenous to this America long before we were brought over in a lot of ways. But, that's some history books to read for that insight. But, there's just this really, really deep culture that we have in as Black Americans here. And it becomes very, very clear when you are like watching comedy or something like that, a comedian stand up and he's talking about all these things that we can relate to. And even people who may look like us, but are Caribbean or from the continent. And we're like, I don't get it. What happened? And it's like, you really realize that there is a distinct culture that we have developed here. And so I honor that.
Yeah, absolutely. I only started identifying as Black American after I started interviewing for this podcast. And that's because I was interviewing a lot of people who I was identifying as Black because they had skin that looked like mine, and I assumed that they identified as Black. Come to find out, these are people who come from, they're either immigrants from the Caribbean or other places, or they are first generation from immigrant families. And just as you said, the culture of Blackness, acknowledging, yes, that race is a social construct, but the culture of Blackness, everything from, well, okay, and let me back up, because when I say the culture of Blackness, I think what I mean is the culture that we created under oppression. And when I think about what you just talked about, like comedy and our dance and so many other parts of our culture, the way that we relate to one another, what are they, African American vernacular, so much of the experience that I have as a Black person, I'm realizing is an experience unique to Black people raised in America. And even with this topic of imposter syndrome or imposter experiences, as I like to say, people from the African diaspora, from other places, don't necessarily have the experience of imposter syndrome or some of the experiences that I have as a Black American. And so I started identifying that way after realizing exactly what you said, that like Black is the culture and I'm an American, which comes with its own set of privileges, particularly considering the global stage. And in America, Blackness means something. And so, yeah, that's really interesting because, I hear some people say Black American, but not a lot of people. So anyways, thank you for that. And I'm glad that you are here. I have a lot of questions for you. We're probably not going to get to them all. I'm really curious about you and your journey, particularly as someone who has created Afros in Audio. How did Afros in Audio come about?
All right. Well, Afros in Audio came about. There's a lot of reasons, right, that aren't particularly obvious, but I grew up basically on a farm on East Shore of Maryland from the age of 6 months to 7 years old. And in this area, which we call down the road because it's down the road from the city that I actually live in now. But down the road, there was no one else in this community but folks that looked like me and you. And my great grandmother was the person who raised my sister and I at that point. And so she was older and the community was older. And we did a lot of community focused activities. And this stuff happened long before I arrived. And even though I talk about my growing up, it sounds like I was born in 1875 versus 1975. But there was still wells, there was still people taking baths outside. There were still ice boxes and stuff like that. And our road wasn't paved yet, that sort of thing. But the really, really distinct part about it was that we lived off the land and the water. So we fished, crabbed, and we grew our own food. And what we didn't have, someone else from the community was growing it or catching it. And so there was this constant back and forth of providing and provisions. And before I came along, and I have about 20 hours of story and narration between my grandmother and I, my great grandmother and my grandmother, her daughter, but between my grandmother and I, who talks about the sustenance lifestyle of, butchering, and until that meat ran out, then the next family would butcher and do the same. Right. And so this was the culture and the community I grew up in, witnessed with my own eyes. There was nobody that came to the door. And this is something that is relatable to a lot of Black folks, especially when they had elders in the household, but people knocking on the door to sell a book and they came in and they ate, right? Anything like that, right? So this was my growing up. I understood community from a very early age and in its purest form, like when it works and when it's reliable and when it's not focused on capitalism or some other type of bull, right? And so because of that, I have been chasing community all my life. And of course, as I continue to grow up and enter into cities and different places, that was gone in a lot of ways. That kinship, that support, those provisions, just were non-existent. And so I say all that to say, in 2017, I created an audio fiction podcast. And at that time, there were like two other audio fiction podcasts out by Black creatives. And it was one, Issa Rae, Fruit, and Lawrence Tate had one out called Brownsville. There may have been a few others, but then there was me. And I needed support and resources that were not there and available, and especially by folks that I wanted to be in community with. So I did what most people do when they're seeking community, is I built it because it wasn't there already. And in 2017 and 2018, the Black audio dramas that exist now did not exist then. And so it was a hard sell and it went nowhere. And so the pivot is the conference. 2019 started the Afros and Audio Conference. And once again, it was about creating resources, support, and community for this emerging medium that had been around for quite some time. But as far as like mainstream, again, Black creators weren't really doing the audio drama thing in 2017. Not like it is now. Now you have Black audio dramas exist, a whole directory, which is a beautiful thing. So that's how it started. I was looking for community, so I built it.
One of the things that I love about you and what I know in your story and our conversation is this understanding of the need for community, and specifically in the need for Black spaces. You know, it's so fascinating to hear about how you grew up, because we grew up completely different. Like, I'm a city girl. I don't have a green thumb, let alone growing food for my family to eat. No, maybe some herbs, maybe. And I hear what you're talking about in terms of the community that you grew up in. And so I wonder, as far as a Black podcasting community, what were you looking for that you could not find? And why was it so significant for you to be able to have that community?
Well, I know, and I'll take it back again just a little bit. And if we think about how much the church has played in our communities, and where I'm going with it is back in the day, right? When we were still very much under a deep oppression, Jim Crow, all of these things. There was this aspect of the Black church where people found not only belonging, but station. So at work, you might be beat down and talked to a certain way and all this sort of thing. But at church, you were the trustee, you were the deacon, you were respected, you were honored, you were seen and heard. And so in that way, our spaces become some of the most important places for us to be, because it is where we're seen, where we're not othered, where we're not the fish in the bowl, where everybody gets to say, "Oh, look at the fish," and let's talk about the fish and all the ways that we can talk about them to make it feel good, and actually doesn't feel good at all. And so it's one of those things where, for me, having this space, especially knowing myself as a creative, knowing that there have been years where I worked in silo. I didn't even know that there were people around me that I could say, "Hey, can you help me with that? What do you think about this? How far do you think I can take this?" Any of those conversations just wasn't there. And so I really, really wanted to make sure that in this podcasting space, we have the right. Writing has been around forever, TV, radio, all of these. There are spaces dedicated to that. But I really wanted to ensure that in this particular medium that we saw ourselves in a position to really make an impact, not only for ourselves, but for one another. Because audio, in my opinion, is king, right? King, queen, whatever, pharaoh, whatever it is. It's, to me, this cornerstone for where a lot of things can be built on top of it. You create this one piece of audio, you can write from it, you can create something visual from it, you can repurpose it in different ways. And audio has been around, oral storytelling, all of that has been around for ancient. It's ancient for us. And so I really, really wanted to make sure that we get into this space and we stay in this space by any means necessary. And so that's why, I'm here.
Hey, y'all. So let's switch gears for just a minute. We talk so much about empowerment of folks of color on this show. And now I want to take a second to talk about our legacy. It's so important that as we're out here doing our thing and making that money and trying to be the people that we want to be for our communities and families, that we get our estate plan together. And I know estate planning can be overwhelming. We've got your back. Our team is here to guide you every step of the way. Wills for the People is an estate planning practice that prioritizes creating and advancing generational wealth, particularly within families of color and middle-class families. This is because it's so important that we just get started. So, what do you want your legacy to be? And what steps have you taken to ensure that that happens? Take those steps with Wills for the People, where intentional planning meets transformative results. Visit our website for your free consultation at willsforthepeoplega.com. Mention Impostrix Podcast and we'll give you 10% off of your package. All right, I'll see you over there. Let's get back to the show. You talk about the fishbowl, and that's one of the reasons that I created Impostrix Podcast, to be in community with, to heal in community with, to support each other, and to let each other know that we're not alone in the experience of being the only or of being one of the few. And I'll say that I'm very fortunate in that for my legal career, because I came to practice in Georgia instead of Washington State, where I'm from, for the most part, there have been people of color and Black people around me in my journey, in my professional journey. And I moved to Georgia for that reason. People ask, how did you move from Seattle to Georgia? Because I wanted to be around Black people. That's period. And notwithstanding, we don't all want to be free. And so it's also been a journey for me navigating some of the cultural differences between Seattle Black person and a South Georgia Black person, and navigating some of the generational differences that exist within communities of color, but also within the professional environment. I wonder if you can share with us about an experience that you've had with navigating the conflict that can arise, dealing with some of the intersectionality of just being a professional and being a Black man in this space, in any space, really.
Well, what's worked for me is exiting stage right. That's what's worked for me. What hasn't worked for me is attempting to fit into the spaces, which I've done for many, many years, over 3 decades. So it's not like I'm unfamiliar with it. It's just that I finally said, yeah, I'm not built for this any longer, because I'm no longer tolerant of it. And I'm seeing things through eyes that are now more aware and more conscious of what is happening. And before, when we are socialized into it, right? We most of us of a certain age all got the same talk. You go to school to get a good job. That's it. Like, that's your life trajectory. I don't want to talk about nothing else. And so that becomes what we perpetuate. And so one of the things that were coming up when you were talking was how it almost seems like, especially when we are the lone, person in those spaces, that we're on stage quite a bit. We're in this need to perform. And that carries over to so many different things in our lives because, quite frankly, television has taught us how to be in a lot of ways, including white folks, right? They're drinking whole pitchers of the juice every day, while we're just, taking sips and just trying to do what we got to do. They're guzzling it, right? And so the thing about it is that there is no real safe space there. And I often, in my last position, and I've had some decent experiences, and I've had some really, really horrible experiences. And my last experience was one that I would say was a not so good one. And what I realized in there, having been in my career for over 20 years at that point and coming to a new company, I realized that would never be about my performance because I know my job. It's about my inability or unwillingness to perform any longer. So I don't have the fake laugh for you. I don't have the small talk. I don't have the fake anything for you anymore. I want to do my job and I want you to leave me the hell alone. That's what I want. And once you get to that space, then you start to really recognize that I need to find something else to do, or I need to get my mind right and just go back into conformity and willingness to do what I need to do in order to get by. So I recognize the privilege inside of being able to say I'm out, even though it doesn't come with a struggle. I know how to make a paycheck. I know that very well. I've been doing it for years. Creating my own way is a whole nother animal, right? So there, work is a default for a lot of us, right? I know how to do that part. So I'll say this. I had an experience where I went to my company office, and I would say it was two or three men there, myself and two other white men, and then surrounded by white women. And so I'm thinking to myself, like, I don't know what these white men are talking about other people taking their jobs, because white women are taking your job. If anybody's taking your job, it's them, right? Because that's all I see. Right? That's all I see and hear. And then that comes with its own stuff, right? Especially being, Black women have their own situations in these jobs. I know them very well. I have a twin sister. I have a sister. I have a wife. I have a mother. So I know. Black men's experiences are interesting as well. There's all this preconceived knowledge of who we are in general, and they know nothing. So there was this little event, and they were playing a game in the room, and it was 12 white women around the table and one white man, and they were trying to get me to go in there and play this game with them. And I'm like, there is nothing about that room that makes me want to go in there and find joy, laughter, or peace. Like nothing. As a matter of fact, I want to run out the door because that's such a scary environment for me. But what's interesting is that I really don't like talking about white people. I know this is what the conversation is about, but I don't like talking about them because it centers them in a way for me that I don't center them at all. But what I realized this time around was that white people will look at you like you've lost your mind when you bring up a problem, because they're kind to each other and they're nice to each other. And so when you say that was offensive or that happened, they're like, that person would never do that. Like they're kind, they're sweet, they're loving. They talk to me nice all the time. What's your issue? I can't even comprehend it. Right. And so what you realize is that there is no need for awareness when you have no need for awareness. You're just in there. Right. And so that becomes a big, big threat to a person like myself and like yourself when you're in an environment where their interaction engagements are way different than the way they interact and engage with you. And therefore, they can't even fathom that the way that you're being interacted with and engaged with is different, even when you bring it up. And so it's a constant struggle, a constant desire to be seen and heard in a space that simply cannot, like, they don't even have the capacity for it. So what do we do in those environments?
Right. And, I have
some amazing white friends, and I know we're not talking about all white people, but we're talking about the experience of being people of color in a predominantly white space. And I really like to differentiate white people from whiteness and white supremacy. This idea that whiteness is supreme, is the best, and in our culture, it's in America. It's the dominant culture, and that feeling that so many of us, myself included, have had of trying to make it make sense in our minds why other people, why it's not making sense, why it's not clicking, why the racism, why the microaggression, why the bias, why the data, like why isn't this stuff clicking for you, is some of the most kind of profound gaslighting that myself and my close group of friends talk about. I think the reason why I like to differentiate whiteness and between white people is because it's many times not purposeful. It just is. It's the default. It's similar to, I just had a conversation where I realized that the colors for my podcast and for another business that I'm starting are not visually accessible. I am someone, I wear glasses, but basically I can see the full range of colors and I can see most stuff. I don't have an issue in that way. So I've never thought about what kind of colors I'm going to be putting on my podcast or my business. It never occurred to me that having 2 neon colors and a brown was going to be an issue for some people to be able to read. And it never occurred because I don't have sight or vision issues. And so for me, navigating these types of spaces sometimes does involve, I guess I want to say maybe not grace, but compassion, but also recognizing for myself, I can have compassion for the people in this circumstance and not want to be around it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because, sometimes we don't have the energy. I think my friends are always like, Whitney, I don't even know why you're messing with it. Because I'm generally the one, like, I love this stuff. I love talking about race. I love talking to all people about how we can interrupt our own bias, about how we can be accountable to each other, and not in a punishing cancel culture type of way, in a loving, look, I know you are a good person. I know that you do care about me. And I also know that you have this blindness because of your race or your culture or how you were raised, or because you don't have a disability or whatever the case may be. And so sometimes for me with conflict, it's a long game in terms of, like, if I'm trying to stay in the environment, trying to work with people, but also acknowledging some people don't want to be worked with. They don't care about understanding. And also my energy is limited. And so making a decision around how much energy I actually want to spend on that really, really makes a difference. And then, managing my expectations, because I can spend a whole lot of my energy on somebody for them to have gone nowhere. And coming back to community is what refills my cup. And when there has been a harm that I've experienced, for me, community is a space of healing, and particularly when it's with other Black women. So again, I'm grateful for the spaces that you've created that are for Black podcasters, because it's necessary for us to have these spaces and the mentorship as well.
Thank you. I would like to say a little bit more to that if I could.
Yes.
There is a space of and I heard what you said about the compassion and empathy. And for me this time around, it was like, I'm actually the one tolerating here. Like, I'm actually the one that's tolerating differences here. Not the other way around. There was a incident that happened maybe 2 weeks into working there where I had to make a decision. And it was an email that got sent by a client. My career has been in pharmaceutical and in the marketing agency side of that and the pharmaceutical industry. And so they were looking to hire the talent for the digital work that was going to be put out for a particular product. And the client sent an email that said, we want to make sure that we have a Black colored person for the shoot. And this was an email that was sent directly to my director. And she read through it and then forwarded it to people who weren't on it. That included myself and some Black women. And when I read it 3 times. I was like, Black colored. No, that's not right. Black. No, that still don't. So I'm trying to make it somehow sound like, okay, that's not what I'm reading.
Right. Make this sound better in my head. Right. No, it doesn't sound better ever.
Yes. So I reached out. So 2 weeks in, I had to make a decision to be courageous and say, I'm struggling to understand why you thought it was okay to forward this email to people who would never have been privy to it, because that's saying that where you lost? Where are you lost? Again, awareness. And she writes back to me saying that she's thankful that I brought it to her attention because it would be something that she's not aware of. And I'm like, so I write back, well, colored hasn't been used since the 1960s. You know that part, right? Mm-hmm. And so this was, and then I just let it go. And then, of course, we get the, Zoom meeting conversation, the smiles and the meekness. And, I'm so grateful that you're here to show us how, when things are. I'm like, but why don't you know it already? So long story short, those are just the things, right, that you already settle into. And this is 2 weeks in. So I'm like, okay, buckle up, buttercup to me, right? This is what we're in for. And I was there for over a year before I decided to leave because of some other microaggression stuff that was going on. But it just was one of those things where you begin to recognize that in order to be here, one, we can't be scarce about losing out on this opportunity, especially when it's to our detriment, right? Especially when, and we already know that HR in a lot of ways is weaponized against us. The moment you bring it up, well, why don't we go and sit down and talk with the person who offended you? Well, that's actually not what I want to do, or else I would have went directly to that person. So you're weaponizing it in this way. And so we have to kind of gear up. This is why community and all these other spaces are necessary, and why Afros and Audio exists, to be the place to go where, even though this is going to happen all day, every day, we need spaces to be able to decompress, to be able to debrief with one another, to say, you won't believe what happened over here. And okay, you get it. I'm not crazy. All right. Boom, boom, boom. That's what I need to know.
Right.
So it's just those things where you get that. And then, to the last piece I want to speak to is I don't identify white supremacy as white supremacy, right? I understand why it's there, but white supremacy is based on scarcity and fear-based decision making. There is nothing supreme about being afraid of losing at every aspect of your life, which is why everything that happens occurs. Every policy that gets created, every police brutality issue that you have, every issue you have in the education system, Roe versus Wade being overturned, it is all fear-based decision-making and scarcity. And so I like to identify things as they are, right? I don't like the term white privilege because we are almost glossing over the complicity of it all. And so there's complicity inside of the privilege. I can walk in here and see a room full of white people and have no problem with it. None. Some of our favorite white actors and actresses walked into film on the film, on the set, and saw nothing but white people around them and kept going. So we've got to really be a little bit more even. And this isn't to you. I'm just talking about the larger conversation. We get to really say, listen, I consider the fact that you're ignorant, but I'm not going to allow it if I get a chance to get around you, because you're actually complicit inside of this.
Ooh, thank you so much for saying that. I absolutely agree with you. And I don't know that I've put those words together in that way. And so I love that, the breaking down of what you just said, because for so many of us, I mean, many of us have had this experience of, this person has said something to me or passed along this email. I'm not sure why they don't know that this is fucked up. Like, I don't understand how this got through. And in those cases, it's like much easier to talk about complicity, I think, and what that has to do with privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we get on the larger systemic scale, we don't talk about complicity associated with privilege. We talk about them as two separate things, and that's not at all what it is. And, you know, I have also been addressed directly as colored by a white man. I've been told that I'm pretty for a colored girl. And my astonishment that somebody could fix their lips to say that to me was, I just never thought that I would experience that. And it is just okay for anybody listening. It's never okay to call anybody colored. Okay. We're just not, that's not a polite term. It's not even politically correct. It's derogatory. It was given as a compliment, you know, in sort of a backhanded type of way, because I guess colored girls are ugly, but I'm not. I'm one of the good ones, the pretty ones. If we are hearing people, and I think going back to your comment about complicity, we talk a lot about allyship. We can all be allies to each other, no matter our complexion or the culture. But when we talk about allyship, you know, that's a word that I try not to use anymore because it doesn't mean anything. Because so long have we applauded people for their, quote, allyship, for simply just not saying racist shit. And no longer do people get that title. And no longer are we going to center people for not saying racist shit. And so today I like to use the word solidarity, which for me means getting involved in the thing, you know, stopping the email, not for, you know, it would have been appropriate for her, your director or whoever, to have responded to the email directly to the person to let them know that it was not okay to use this language and why it's not okay to use this language, and then to not have forwarded it. And then to have decided if they were going to continue the working relationship with this entity. That takes courage. It takes acting within values that people say that they have. It takes turning down money sometimes. And that's what we have to do to be the good people that we say that we are. I know you're a life coach. I'd love to learn more about the work that you do in your coaching and how you are addressing issues that are unique to Black people or people of color.
Sure. And I'm very clear on who I work with. I work with Black folks, work with Black creatives and entrepreneurs. And really it is about the socialization, right? Revolution starts in the mind. We can do all the acts, but if we're still believing a lot of the things that we've been socialized to understand and believe and know, then we are already off in the wrong direction. And so a lot of ways, once again, because we are socialized by a fear-based and scarce society and people that's inside of our politics, inside of our school systems, inside of our workplaces, then naturally we will have that as our own foundation. And in a lot of ways, being able to move through that is one of the most difficult aspects of it. So you're going to have the imposter syndrome, because what else are you going to have if you are consistently on stage every time you're around? white folks, right? If they know who you are before knowing anything about you and they operate from that space, then you are wearing it as if it's you, right? And we, any of us can be the trajectory of who we aren't rather than who we are. And so that's the work. The first work is dismantling, right? Dismantling the things that we believe to be true about ourselves and about society. And so you find a lot of Black folks that are not just dealing with imposter syndrome, but perfection, because that is another, byproduct of this white inferiority complex. And so it's all of those things, helping folks to recognize how powerful we actually are, period, full stop. Like, that's it, and we are the creators, the innovators. We started this. We've done everything, right? And so, but it's one thing to say that we are the creators. And it's another thing to own, right? To own our power, to own our intellectual property, to own the things that we create. And I have been a victim of it as well, right? And then to your point earlier, it's some of us have an aversion to being free, because what does that even feel like or look like? And so if I don't even know what that feels like and looks like, but I know what this looks like, conforming, staying in my place, doing what I need to do in order to get by, that's familiar, that's safe, I understand it very well. And so that's the work. I mean, it truly is the work of having someone say, oh, wow, you mean I have these two businesses and I'm still holding on to this job because I'm scared of what if I release it. But wow, there's so much more to gain when I release that all together and recognize that I have it. I had it all along. I know how to do this. I've just been taught that it's not possible. And I've just been taught that I can't. And I've just been taught that people like me don't get those opportunities. That's deliberate. And we've got to recognize how deliberate that is.
Everything that I'm hearing you saying about scarcity mindset and how we operate, for me, just keeps going back to capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism. And it's so clear to me how deeply ingrained in you community is, and not community maybe as most people know, but community as in reliance on each other, interconnectedness, and sustaining community, I think might have been a word that you used. And so for me, to your point about some of us having this aversion to freedom, it's almost like I don't know what to imagine, And this year has been, 2023 has been a year of that imagining. And it's amazing. It's an amazing experience. I'm enjoying this conversation, but I know we need to wrap up soon. So I'd like to know, I got two final questions for you. What's something that you've learned on your journey and being an entrepreneur and a creative and a life coach that you want to share with others?
There's so many, but I will stick to, I guess, the theme, right? And that, and what we just talked about, everybody is not an entrepreneur. Everyone isn't a creative. So respect that. However, on the other side of scarcity is always abundance. Always, right? That's the opposite side of it. And so whatever it is, you can't bring anything else in new if you're afraid to let go of things that no longer serve you. And so two of my coaching philosophies, one is that I am is 100% invention and creation, meaning that whatever I believe about myself is 100% up to me to invent and create. Okay. But we got to shut out outside noise, right? And outside noise is society and family and friends and whoever else is guzzling the Kool-Aid too. Because sometimes our liberation is connected, other people's liberation is connected to ours, right? So you show how it's done. They're not going to be convinced until they see it, period, right? So if you have it, do it. Go for it, because their liberation is connected to yours, right? In a lot of ways. And so for me, I'll end it with this one. And this is something that I realized one day when I started my hero's journey. In 2015, was that life is not short. It's actually the longest thing that I'm going to experience. So I get to be in pursuit of whatever it is that I want to experience in this life that I have. Who else is it for, right? I don't belong to anyone else. No one belongs to me. And I've got a wife and children. They don't belong to me, right? We are lucky enough to have been able to cross paths and be a part of each other's life. But I don't belong to nobody and no one belongs to me. And so with that said, there's opportunity in that. There's opportunity in living the life that you want to and that you want to pursue and experience versus consistently being inside of this socialized need and supposed to life that we often find ourselves in.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, you touched on this in answering this last question, but what's a mantra or an affirmation that you tell yourself that you rely on right now in this season?
I'm capable. Right? There's a deliberate thought that we aren't, right? There's that deliberate socialization that we aren't capable of having and doing the things that we can conceptualize in our mind. I'm of a belief that of 8 billion people in the world, if this thought came to you, then clearly it's yours. And you already have what you need to realize it. Maybe there's more education, maybe there's more training, maybe there's support, maybe there's whatever it needs to be, but it could have went to one of the other 8 billion easily. So recognize that and really be with the fact that you are capable.
Thank you. Can you share with us how folks can find you?
Sure, absolutely. So if you want to find me, I'm at Talib Jasir on Instagram, talibjasir.com, where you can see some of my writing and work with me, my podcast that I've created and produced, and also Afros and Audio, which I'm very, very proud of. And, you want to experience community, it's intentional community over there, and you will feel it. Everyone feels it. And so I'm very proud of that. And so afrosandaudio.com for Black independent podcast creatives and audio professionals and creatives in general. We have something for everyone.
And is there, besides the festival, is there like an ongoing kind of community?
Sure. Black Podcasters Association.
Yep.
Yes, is our community. And we partnered. Corey Gums is the founder of that. He just made the board of Air Media. So congratulations to Corey. Shout out. And so he founded the Black Podcast Association. And I'm one person. I wanted community, but I couldn't do it all. And Corey is a person who shares my same beliefs and integrity about community. And so we partnered in 2021 and we've been rocking ever since.
Awesome. That's great. All right. Well, thank you so much for this conversation today. It was a pleasure having you. Oh, man. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. Wasn't it great? I always get so much from the conversations that I have with my guests. Feel free to join us in the community space on Facebook. You can just search for Impostrix Podcast Validating Space, and you should be able to find it. We welcome all, and it's a space for us to validate each other and engage with each other one-on-one, or in a group setting. You can find out all the information about me and Impostrix Podcast at www.impostrixpodcast.com. Until next time, be validated.